Oh.
I just don't want it associated with my business.
No, I totally get that. Makes total sense. So are you entering the Zoom? All right, we are recording.
Okay, all right.
You're live.
Well, welcome to the Cult of Conversation.
Oh. By the way, actually, I talked to a friend of mine this morning, and he wants to be a subscriber.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So we've already got one potential subscriber. If we don't screw this up.
If we don't mess it up. Yeah. No, whenever I pass it by the idea by people like the idea and want to be involved somehow. I don't, So I
well,
think
just have them send money.
Yeah. We'll see if we can send some. Yeah.
Checks, gold bullion, always appreciated.
We're gonna get rich for sure.
Sure. Okay, so in terms of our itinerary here, you need to explain our title. Why are we called the Cult of Conversation?
Okay, so there's a little bit of a personal history to this. When I was still teaching. One of the things I taught was Enlightenment philosophy and history. And the background is I kind of created a three-part sort of historical model for my students to understand where the Enlightenment fit in, the before and the after. And I use...
Can I interject?
Yeah.
For those who are total neophytes to any intellectual endeavor, describe or define the Enlightenment. Because not everyone knows this.
So the Enlightenment is what I'm talking about is the period in Europe, specifically between about 1680 and 1830. That's called the Long Enlightenment, or the long 18th century. And it's a period of time in which there were radical transformations in the world of science, religion, industry, economics, new ideas about how to understand the world and your place in it. And so it was a radical change. Like we're talking change like at a pace that really hadn't been seen before, in my opinion. And it's where we can probably trace ourselves, where we were born, the modern person.
Intellectually, right.
Intellectually, yeah. And as far as ideas go, really that's the groundwork was laid for the scientific revolution during this period of time, and everything that capitalism, democracy, all of these things emerged out of that period. And so that period of time became the most exciting for me in my studies. And so it became the center of my attention. I taught a lot of courses on the period and wanted to be able to frame it for students so that they'd understand why is it a big deal? Like it's hard to know how history has influenced you unless you can kind of see it framed in a sandwich between a past, a prior period, the period in question, and then where we're headed or where we are. And one of the ways I did that is I created these little titles. One was the culture of confession, was that which preceded the 18th century, the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was the culture of critique. And then the modern period I called the culture of complaint.
So and are these is this your kind of nomenclature?
This is mine. Yeah, this is my whole, I used this. I wasn't borrowing this from anybody else. It's the ideas I used within those frames are traditional.
Right.
But the way that I framed it, I wanted to say, because in Catholicism, of course, you have a culture of confession where and what that meant is that where power resided socially was not in you as an individual, it was outside of you. So you confess to those who were in the position of innocence and power and authority, the church, the state, and you were the cause of all the problems. You were the reason things went bad because you were a sinner, and you were in your place in the hierarchy of society because you were designed that way by God. You were placed in that position. It was static, and that's where we get the word status from. It was fixed, unchangeable. They called it the chain of being. That part doesn't really matter, but the point is that power, where authority and trust was located, was in the church, the state, and revelation from God, not in your own self. You were not trusted. You were not an authority. and the structure was organized from God down in a kind of hierarchical fashion.
Right. So
And,
for the ordinary person, then you're looking at a world in which anything that really matters, all meaning, all purpose, all validity, is external. I guess originally you'd say in a text. But
yeah,
the
that's
average
right.
person did not really have access to the text just because of
Nice. Yeah.
not widespread literacy.
Well, the
So the
translation of the
church,
Bible was really one of the key turning points, right? Because as
right,
soon as you
right.
had access, the everyday person could read and had access to the sacred texts, all of a sudden interpretive anxieties started to evolve where people were independent, thinking for themselves, right? And this is a problem, a serious problem for the state, because by holding everything in Latin, first of all, and the father tongue, rather than the local mother tongue. You hand it over even to women. Like there are quotes where these guys are all grumpy because even women are now reading. They've thrown these pearls of sacred text to the swine of the common person and to
That's
even women.
Proverbs, I believe, right?
Yeah, no, that's in the New Testament. I think it's Matthew. But the
No, but
idea of
tossing pearls to swine, I think it's
don't throw your pearls to
yeah.
the swine. And it's an explicit idea of who should have rights to the most important ideas. And as that was democratized, as ideas were democratized and reading, reading sacred text became open to anybody, you stopped moving from a culture of confession to one of critique, where ideas were challenged and ideas were questioned. And the individual, the authority was being relocated and trust was being relocated from sources of knowledge outside the self to sources of knowledge in the self, reason, feelings, emotions, the passions, right? And all of a sudden you could start to trust yourself to be a morally good person. You didn't need somebody outside of you to keep you in check because you had a sympathetic nervous system. This is where we got that idea from, that we were naturally born with compassion and that we took care of each other. We had a symbiotic relationship, a democratic emotional body, literally through the fibers of our own bodies, that made it possible to imagine a community without a king. And so you can see how democracy emerges out of that. The scientific revolution is happening at the same time. And these are, as soon as authority begins to be located with reason and the senses, which were always derided as untrustworthy. You needed revelation, you needed God, you needed a source of knowledge outside of you was the only trustworthy thing. You ended up in a contest of who had the right to determine the future politics, everything. And now the individual, we had things like common sense became a good thing. It used to be common sense didn't make any sense. The commoner was a waste of time. You were functionally irrelevant. And so what happened in the 18th century is, and during the Enlightenment, is you had the rise of the public sphere. And that's what I'm talking about when I say a culture of critique. Critique does not mean something negative. It means that you could come into a conversation, right, without having to have some authority over you telling what makes sense. You could trust your own mind to solve that. And the contest would happen between people, and tea group, these tea houses would open up and people who were lower order society could suddenly talk in that space. They were relevant because they had reason and everybody had access to this. And suddenly knowledge or reason or insight was democratized. And it really moved from a world, technically the language would be, it moved from an ontological worldview to an epistemological worldview, a worldview in which your identities were determined by, before you were born. They were ready for you to be placed into after birth, and your blood was what defined your worth. To qualities were what defined your worth. To quantities, money, the quantity of your bank account suddenly mattered in a new way with the rise of capitalism. And blood gave way to reason and the senses and your ability to think. And what I would say is since then, the culture of critique has kind of given way to a culture of complaint, where you end up with a society that relocates responsibility on government officials and says that it's a whining culture where you're just saying these are all the bad people. So instead of taking responsibility as the critic, saying my conversations matter wherever they are, with whoever I'm talking with. That's what's center stage. It's kind of dissolved to a culture of blame, where you're relocating responsibility and trust in some ways without noticing it to other people. Because as soon as you blame them, you're saying they're responsible. So you're abandoning the position of authority. So part of what I wanted was to revive, participate in some kind of revival of the idea that conversations matter. And so, really, and borrowing a little bit from something I heard in a conversation with Sam Harris one time. He said that really we have conversations. That's how we solve things as humans.
Or violence.
And so what I did is I thought, that's not actually the only way we do it. It's either by force or conversation. There are 3 ways in my mind that humans solve problems. That's it. In my mind, this is just a hypothesis, but we can experiment with it together, you and I. And this is what part of the cult of conversation, I think, is about. Is in Immanuel Kant's What is Enlightenment, he talked about those who are enlightened, an enlightenment of one, where they're all by themselves and they feel enlightened. He says that's not enlightenment. Enlightenment means you go from contemplation to conversation. If you don't make the step from contemplation as a way to solve problems and go to conversation, you are not participating in enlightenment, because enlightenment is a group project, a conversational project. So conversation, you can solve problems by contemplation, but you can also solve them by conversation. The other alternative, and the only one, is coercion, force. What's interesting is, what are the lines between those 2 things, right? Between the 3. So you've got, contemplation, conversation, and coercion. Is shame coercion? Is shaming somebody coercion? Or would you say it's the law, where the law is, that's coercion? When does it become force? And that would be an interesting thing to kind of figure out. But I'm pretty much an absolutist for free speech. So for me, my window of what a conversation means ranges from just an everyday conversation at work to mockery. Not that I value personally mockery, it's not my style, but I see it as a valuable part of conversation, not coercion. But everybody has different sensibilities on what a conversation is and where coercion begins. But that's it. Those are the only solutions we have. So in my mind, the only cult I would ever want to be part of, or I could imagine myself being part of, is one in which we give the status of conversation, give to conversation the status that we would often give to other things that we might say are sacred or something like that. I don't really like that language, but I think people understand what I'm saying when I use it.
Well, no, we discussed this a few days ago. So actually, it was yesterday. Yeah. And then the sense of irony being there, because
that's right.
Yeah, because when people start thinking en masse, the same, and not. Yeah, and you have people who are not challenging obvious absurdities. It's basically large, widely shared belief system just become something we adhere to because I want to be a part of that tribe. That's what we think of as a cult. And you could be a small cult, with 30 or 40 people, or, arguably, some major religions are just, overgrown cults.
And honestly, Craig, I don't want to be. I want to be able to have conversations with people who disagree with me. I don't want to be in a world in which I'm just constantly be affirmed with my ideas. Because how can you tell whether your ideas make any sense or are valued, or unless they're tested against those who disagree with you? And so part of my goal was to find a way to meet people who are actually eager to have conversations that in the arena of disagreement, rather than finding a silo in which I can find other people who are like me. And I think that's been a problem with the internet, is it's super exciting, but you can always find people who agree with you and then never have to think about anything that might be confronting.
So here's something where I've kind of brushed into people who push back against this. I won't name names, but people who don't really like the idea of, quote, diversity.
Right.
People who, they clearly they're uncomfortable about it. It's not that they're racist or anything like that. They're simply uncomfortable with it. And then you get all these very, sort of woke sentiments in corporations and what have you. We have the diversity officers now, and
Right.
I don't know how good or helpful these kinds of things are. But what I will say is that one thing I know just from study of sociology, or actually, I think I probably encountered these ideas in the business program, the MBA I did. Was that organizations that have more viewpoints. So if you take a group of people and you assign a task to them, or there's a problem they've got to solve, and if they're a bunch of 50-year-old white men, they may or may not come up with a good response to whatever problem it is. But it's been shown that the odds are, if you have a diversity of, say, ages, people in their 20s up to their 60s or 70s or whatever, and then you have, well, not just a bunch of men, but you've got, say, 40% or more of women, and you've got people who are from, say, different geographic locales. When you start getting these kinds of, diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences, ages, and what have you, you tend in general to get better results in terms of problem solving, decision making. This is, I think, you could look at the financial industry, and look at the massive fraud and destruction of wealth that occurred, in the last decade. I think a lot of this is driven because of you've got the same sorts of people, basically, young guys with too much testosterone, basically just going after the bottom line with the they're all following the exact same motives, the same incentives. And I think that having, diverse people, you don't have to be PC or anything. You could be totally self-interested and say, this is the way to do it. This is the kind of group I want to hang out in, because better results are going to follow. And I think that this is scientifically, just a known item that,
Yeah, I don't have a scientific study to back it up, but I do have my experience in the classroom with students. And when you have, this is just a personal thing I've noticed over the years.
Just watching students work together?
Watching students, yeah. So if you're having a class and you have a heavy emphasis on conversation in the classroom, one thing you notice is when you have a lot of diversity of opinion and background, cultural, age, any kind of item of diversity that you can get your hands on in the classroom, the best thing that happens in a classroom, the thing that makes things exciting both for me as a teacher and then for the students, isn't when I'm saying cool shit to people or telling them, things. It's when we're talking as a group and you have one person over here saying this and everybody turning their heads to them. And then, when all of a sudden the conversation takes over and it's no longer the teacher on center stage, it can happen better every time when there is diversity. So it's not just in terms of capital wealth, it's in terms of,
I was just using that as an example.
Knowledge wealth, right?
Yeah, no, I was just using that as an example.
Yeah,
I think if you had a research team, if there's some scientific problem, some research issue that you're investigating, I would far rather have a group of people from diverse backgrounds and ages, both sexes represented. This is why, you get problems where a certain field is totally dominated by a certain particular group. Maybe it's all women or all men, or, it's all a certain age cohort or race or whatever. That's an area, it could be the most, arcane thing, some higher form of mathematics. We need to have more female mathematicians. There just aren't enough. It's like 95% of all mathematicians are men. And lay money on it, they're probably all, mostly white and maybe some Asian as well. But, it's an area I'm sure that would benefit. So anyway, this is not a discussion about diversity, but I think coming back to your point, the value of conversation and diverse experiences and opinions and what have you.
Yeah, so I'm hoping what what you and I are trying to do here, just eventually or at some point, we get to have conversations with people who don't necessarily agree, but who we can participate in a kind of attitude of persuasion rather than just sitting around expressing our moral opinion. We can actually engage and try to persuade. I value being persuaded and persuading. I mean, I think it seems like we're in a world where everybody's just hunkering down to their moral corner and accusing everybody else of being evil people. And it just doesn't seem like that's very productive socially, culturally, politically, or in any way. And
So there's a new documentary out. It's on Netflix. It's called The Social Dilemma. I think
oh
the
yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, I haven't
you
watched it.
saw it.
No,
Okay.
I haven't seen it
You
yet,
saw
but
it
I'm
on the
hearing
okay on
back.
the feed,
Yeah.
yeah, because I think that they're riffing on the Social Network movie.
Oh, I
You know,
see.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's by a guy who I forget his name. He actually was on. The reason I know about him is because he was on Sam Harris's podcast. It's the most recent podcast
Oh, okay.
that Harris did. But yeah, where this guy actually helped to create a lot of the I guess algorithms and what have you that are essentially driving what's happening on Twitter and Facebook and what have you. But
Right.
yeah, it's a pretty bleak picture that he's illustrating. I haven't seen the documentary yet. That's on my list to
Yeah,
watch.
it's certainly going to be on mine. And now that you've mentioned it, I think it
Yeah,
looks like
yeah,
it's.
and it's on that if you got a Netflix
Yeah, no, I'm going to
subscription,
check. I'm
obviously.
going to check that out. So,
Um,
so why don't we introduce ourselves
no,
and,
I
and
was just gonna say, yeah.
talk about what it is we're going to do next? Because if I remember correctly, Craig, what we had come up with was we wanted to do potentially three different things. So why don't you help us get there?
Okay, well, just no. So for introducing ourselves, so my name is Craig Shoemake. I live in Massachusetts. Let's see. Okay, so as an undergrad, I studied psychology and comparative religion. I spent the better part of a decade wandering around Asia. I was living in some way out places,
You're a monk.
caves,
You're a monking yourself
caves,
out. Yeah.
grass huts out in the mountains. I was in Sri Lanka. I was in Japan. I lived in a Zen monastery for a year. I taught English in South Korea. And yeah, it's actually remarkable actually that I survived all of it, given there were a number of instances I probably could have easily been killed, like by
Wow.
wildlife.
Right.
Yeah, well, cobras will do you in. So, yeah, monkeys that get upset at you if you're not
Oh
doing
yeah.
what. Oh yeah,
Oh,
no, I mean the
monkeys
male
are like
monkeys.
horrible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So a male monkey that gets angry at you or thinks you're threatening the tribe, yeah, that can be dicey. But
Vicious. Yeah.
so yeah, I was doing that because I was on a spiritual quest to get enlightened. That's a different use of the word enlightenment,
Sure.
obviously. But um, so doing that and teaching English along the way, and I ended up getting married along the way. None of this was planned. there was there,
Yeah.
there was no overarching master
I
plan
know
to any of this.
it's funny how we put narrative lines to like our life, but if you just sort of list the stuff, it makes no sense.
No, no, no. There was actually a case. This is a different thing for off camera,
Sure.
but
Sure.
yeah, where I was at Johns Hopkins. I told you about the whole. Well, I'll tell about this. The
Yeah. Yeah.
psilocybin
Yeah. Go
research,
for it. Sure.
the whole psilocybin research project, which I was involved in. I was one of their case studies where I had to lay out my entire life, literally. Like I'm talking
Wow.
to two people, and I've never done this in such depth. It was about 5 or 6 hours long. But
Oh wow.
at
I'm
the
sure
end
that's
of it, I
pretty
felt
cool.
like I must appear like a madman,
Yeah. Right.
But anyway, so things have, for the most part, worked out, reasonably well. I finally came back to the States in 1998. And it was to get an MFA, and I was interested in creative writing. I had, story ideas and what have you. I thought that was a good way to go. I learned that it wasn't. I learned that going to an MFA program wasn't necessary for that sort of project. That was also a learning. process. Anybody who's out there who's been through an
Well, and that's where
MFA.
we met. That's where we
Yeah,
met.
so well,
That's
that's the
Fresno
good part
State.
here.
Yeah.
In Fresno, California State University, Fresno, you were also in the writing lab there, and you
Yeah.
were teaching, and I was teaching. And so there was this guy who was at the table behind me, and he was like cracking up at his own jokes. And his jokes were kind of funny, although his students didn't always get his jokes. I
No.
was like, okay, I got to talk to this guy because I like his sense of humor.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. He's funny to himself.
he's nobody else thinks he's funny.
Yeah.
Or
Really.
maybe it's just only 1 in 1,000, and that one
Yeah.
is not in. Maybe I'm the one in this room here right now. So
My jokes were so amazing. Only very few people could.
over the top.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah. So that's how we got to meet each other. We ended up, I think, swapping poetry in a coffee shop or something.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, it kind of went from there. But then that was a very brief, halcyon days, because we were like just that very brief instance in Fresno. And then you went on this wild trip to Africa, and you left my wife and me in charge of your house and your cats.
Yeah.
And we were wondering, like, what would it be like if I came back and the whole house is empty? like this guy like completely pulled the wool over my eyes. But no, that
Well,
didn't
we
happen.
did come home to some mushrooms in our closet that were growing, and
That's not true. What? We didn't plant any mushrooms.
yeah, you guys made that. You left us some of that. What was that drink with?
Oh,
mushrooms?
those. Okay, you mean the kombucha?
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh,
but that's not like. I thought you were talking about like magic.
Yeah, no,
mushrooms.
not psilocybin.
No, okay.
Sadly.
Maybe one day we'll get to those, but anyway, so that was California. And long story short, my wife and I ended up moving to Boston. Again, this was for going to Emerson College, the writing program there. But eventually I realized that an MFA program was not for me when one of my teachers, who basically started off the class with a list of all the genres she did not want to see. And I was rather pissed because I was mostly writing science fiction and fantasy. At the end of that class, I wrote on this teacher evaluation, I wrote that I did not come here and pay thousands of dollars to be told what I should write. And I signed my name in like the biggest letters. She knew exactly who it was. Yeah. So it was very expensive. I was now at that point deeply in debt, because of because of the programs, which were very expensive. But anyway, so I ended up getting, a job working here. And so this is now 20 years I've been living in Boston, but I've done my own writing on my side. I've written a novel, didn't get published by, a mainstream publisher. It was an African, it's a fantasy novel based on an African mythology and folklore and what have you. And I've actually gotten some short stories published. One of them was published in Slice magazine, which is internationally distributed.
Nice.
I've continued doing I've done a lot of reading in contemplative spirituality, meditation. I've had a regular meditation practice all these years. I can't claim to be enlightened. Maybe one day, but
not a Sotapana, not a Sotapana yet.
That's an ongoing project. But so what I earlier referenced, the Johns Hopkins, anybody who knows about psilocybin research, they were looking for people who were psychedelic virgins, as they call them,
right?
And but who had been practicing meditation, because there's a lot of overlap between psychedelics and meditative experiences. And so I passed all of the just sort of the initial questions to screen people out. Obviously, if I have a background in schizophrenia or those kinds of things, they don't want you in. Fortunately,
mental health
stuff. Yeah, that kind of stuff. So no schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is the main thing they got to look out for.
Oh, okay.
Also bipolar, that kind of stuff. But yeah, so that was my first experience with psilocybin, and I've also participated in some psychedelic mushroom retreats in Jamaica. Actually helped the guy who's the head of micro meditations Eric Osborne. I actually helped him. He actually came here to our house, and we helped him build a business plan. And he's flourishing now. Of course, the pandemic has kind of put a damper on things for him. But yeah, so things have gone well. Let's see, what else? I've got a cat, a daughter. Yeah, I also I've run a couple businesses, real estate, sold one, and still running the other here in Boston, and have my day job. And as I told you a couple weeks ago, I have restarted a novel that I had discontinued 11 years ago, which, if I'm remembered 300 years from now, it will be because of this book.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to reading
we'll
it.
see. Yeah. So yeah, it sort of brings me up to speed. So you just froze, Chad.
Sorry, say that again.
You just froze. Yeah, you just froze
you
out.
did too. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yep.
yeah, so I think that brings me up to speed. So
Okay.
how
Yeah.
about
So I'll introduce myself then. I'm Chad Schmidt. I grew up in BC, Canada, in Vancouver, the Lower Mainland, and in a family that was loosely a religious Christian. Although I wasn't going to church as a kid, I did eventually got converted when I was about 16 or 17, and pretty in a pretty radical way. That some of the typical born again experiences, later spoken tongues and all this kind of stuff, and it was pretty passionately involved in that world. I was an athlete in high school, and I don't think anybody thought I was headed towards the academic world. I'm not sure anybody thought I was terribly bright.
more the NBA?
Yeah, more likely some kind of sports thing or college through athletics. Or I mean, I think people saw me as somebody who could hang out with any crowd socially. So I was successful that way. Socially, I was a really successful kid in high school. Hung out with kind of hang out with any crowd. I had a lot of fun, but I don't think anybody thought I was an academic. But I ended up traveling, studying. I probably traveled and studied or taught in over 20 countries. I could name dozens of places I've been and spent lots of time in, including India a couple of times. I took my wife there and in fact, my wife and I met overseas. We were teaching English in Lithuania in 1995. We got married in 96. She was from California, and we hooked up, as they say, in St. Petersburg, and kind of got together.
Really? I didn't.
Yeah.
You got married in St. Petersburg?
No.
Okay.
No, we just got together.
Oh, okay. Wow.
That's where the romance started, was in Lithuania, and then we traveled with some friends to St. Petersburg, went to the Hermitage. It was amazing. Yeah, it was terrific. But she was from California. She was hot. I was flexible. So I moved to California. That's basically right. What happened? We either were going to get married or not. I mean, the long distance thing wasn't working. She happened to have a Mennonite background like I do, because my background is Mennonite. And I was still, at that time, relatively devout and involved in my religion. It was a mission that we went on. And we were, after we got married, we were still going to church and that kind of thing. But along the way, I've craved honesty and truth. Even as a kid, I remember pursuing this and wondering, what is really true? And that's what has driven most of my intellectual life. What is true? What is worth knowing? What is worth understanding? And what's worth experiencing? And my conversion experience was one of the best things that ever happened to Christianity. But falling apart out of it was not. And a lot of that happened while I was married with Shauna in those early years, and when we were in Fresno, because she was from Fresno in California, which is where you and I met. And I was going to school.
Was this after 98, John?
Yeah. I was when you and I met, I was really interested in things like Carl Jung and transitioning to a kind of modified spirituality, right? Where I didn't want to I would have never named myself a non-theist or atheist or anything like that. That would have sounded too.
Yeah, I remember you were kind of resistant to that, any of those labels.
Did I believe in a God? Maybe. I really did fluctuate. Losing my faith was it was painful. While I was in Bible school, I studied theology. I have a certificate in biblical studies. I went to Bible school in Sweden for a year with some friends, studied theology there, and studied theology in before I met Shauna, before I met my wife, in Winnipeg, Canada as well, and studied pretty hard. But also my faith started to go through a lot of what I might call ontological anxieties or existential crisis. And I really did kind of almost, not fall apart, but I really was decimated by the possibility that what I'd been believing may not be true. And in the doubts sort of ate away at me over time. And up and down, it was sort of like a stock market with my feeling like I had this intimacy with God that just gave me such a rush and a thrill. And then to count on truth as a priority rather than just what I experienced, it put that in crisis, and I couldn't sustain one while I was trying to follow the other, and it was torture. And I was worried that I'd married somebody who believed and who was a believer, and I was going to have to accept it anymore privately by myself. It was a big anxiety. I'll never forget one time when Shauna, we were in the bathroom getting ready for work or something, and we were talking about hell, whether hell made sense as an idea. And she just looked at me and goes, I'm not sure I can buy that Mormons are just going to go to hell or that anybody's going to. It just doesn't make sense. Right?
Uh-huh.
And it was such a relief. I'll never forget the feeling of the possibility that I might be able to be in a marriage with somebody I cared about who I wasn't going to have to hide from the ideas as they were waning. And over time, we went our own ways. She did a whole bunch of different stuff.
Yeah, I remember the whole yoga.
Her path was very different than mine. We actually didn't talk about that a lot in those years. But we were going through our own thing, and we came out the other side, outside of it. And, as both atheists and skeptics and humanists and secularists. And that's one of my main journeys. Well, I got a PhD at Rutgers in comparative lit, although I really feel that I'm more of a conceptual historian. I studied human emotion, pity, and compassion, the history of human feeling, power, money, and all the things related to that in the 18th century Enlightenment. My language was ancient Greek, so I also taught ancient Greek mythology, world mythology, world religions. I got to teach at George Mason, an adult program there, and so I taught that, and I was a bit of a specialist in critical theory, so like psychoanalysis, Marxism, postmodernism, queer theory, deconstruction. All of those were things I loved and valued and taught at university. I taught at Shepherd University in West Virginia as a full-time prof. I taught at Rutgers before that when I was getting my PhD, and took a few courses at Princeton, but did most of my work at Rutgers. Was lucky to work with Michael McKeon, was my dissertation director, a famous guy in the world of the 18th century, and Drusilla Cornell, political activist, and Josephine Diamond, and some of these other people. I was pretty lucky to be able to work with some of those people, and was in the US for about 19 years working there. But I started a real estate business on the side when I was still a full-time prof, and I was making a lot more money doing that. And in my second year, I was probably making 3 times as much selling real estate. And I do think Shauna loved me just a little bit more as a real estate agent than as a professor. And I couldn't really justify the way it changed our life to suddenly have access to just, all I was doing was telling people the truth about homes. That's it, right? Like, and then
it's never struck me as a really intellectually demanding job.
But it is. You can be successful just by being somewhat knowledgeable,
right.
Being able to work with contracts and telling the truth.
Yeah.
And if you tell the truth, people come back to you, right? So who knew you could be an ethical salesperson? I didn't know. That was an oxymoron to me. But that as soon as I wasn't attached to the university and I shifted to full-time real estate, we all of a sudden weren't attached to the university, and we wanted our kids to be close to family. So we moved back to Vancouver. I've been here five years now, working in the family business, selling group benefits and insurance and stuff. I'm a person of many trades. I've been a fisherman in the Queen Charlotte Islands. I've worked on fish farms. I've been a cook at Boston Pizza. I've done so many different things.
Boy, say it again. You were a cook at Boston Pizza?
Yeah, yeah, I was a cook at a restaurant.
Not in Boston, though.
No. Boston Pizza
Okay,
is a
all right.
chain. It's a
Oh,
chain.
okay, okay,
It might
okay.
even be just a Canadian chain. I don't know if it's even in the U.S.
Because
But
I don't even know of Boston Pizza in Boston, and I've been living around Boston for
no,
20
think
years.
it, I don't think it's from. I don't even think it originated in
Yeah, I
Boston.
don't actually recognize the chain.
No,
That's funny.
but I mean, so I've lived a pretty fun life. All the travel and teaching and stuff. I've had a lot of fun, and here we are.
So, so what we wanted to do next was just to talk about our format and what we're planning to do with this.
Yeah.
So the initial,
Yeah.
so you had brought up this whole thing kind of got going when you mentioned the book Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker, and
Yeah.
you had said, I really wish I had someone to like read this with, and
right.
I've volunteered my services.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's not like it would be our first go around at conversation.
No, of course not. But no, but we'd never actually made the point of like reading a book together and then systematically commenting on it.
That's right.
But given the fact that we're all that we're in the last days of Earth, and
yeah, I know that's what
the signs of the apocalypse are upon us.
I know you're getting that from the book, right? I mean,
no, I'm not. I'm making this shit up.
No, check it out. You're not going to believe this. Check it out.
Really?
It says on the back of this
you
book.
Think the world? Oh my God! No, I didn't read that. Hold up.
Yeah,
let me get my copy. Just a moment. Hold up.
If you think the world is coming to an end, he goes, think again.
See how I look like I'm walking around on the planet?
Yeah, I know, right? Where are your pajamas?
Don't I look like I'm walking around on the planet when I do that?
Well, it looked like you kind of disappeared behind it.
Well, yeah, momentarily, but then I'm walking back and I'm like on this foreign
It does
body.
look like you're walking on the planet.
It's pretty
right?
badass, actually. I like the effect. But yeah, so here's...
That's your copy? Okay.
Yeah,
so
this is the hardback. Yeah, this is the hardback. This is probably the first one.
If anybody ever does watch this... This is the book that we're
yeah, well, so page numbers, maybe we should compare the page numbers. So the chapter on terrorism starts, that's chapter 13, page 191. What do you have?
191, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's great. So they kept the pagination. So anyway, so you were the one who sort of floated this idea of, if only I had someone to read something with, and then, like I said, I volunteered my services. And then because we have all been getting very used to this marvelous technology, whether we like it or not, I suggested that we start doing, some Zooms. And then the crazy idea of actually creating a YouTube channel was sort of my input. Because now I'm going to riff on this because it really is, I think, anybody out there will find this amusing. So as a little kid, I was an avid collector of Hot Wheels cars. I still have all of my original, these are like, vintage, early, mid 19, some of them actually back to the 60s, 70s cars that are almost all of them in immaculate condition. Some of them, if you go on eBay, go for literally one car will go for hundreds of dollars. I had a few duplicates that I sold for like $50 a pop. These are cars that you would have gotten for $1 at the grocery store, a few decades back. But I've got, I had 64 of those in a box I've had, one of those little Matchbox carrying cases.
I
where you
remember
can put,
those, yeah.
Yeah. So I've got all that still. And
you might want to say how old we are. Are we going to confess to
No.
that?
I'm 25,
okay.
but
yeah, okay.
I just have all these old cars.
Yeah.
But well, no, I think I said as much. I'm 54 years old.
Okay.
Anybody can do the math out there. But yeah, so for some reason, I don't know why, but I was just curious one day, and I looked up Hot Wheels on on YouTube because I was curious if people were actually like had these or they were racing them, because I've always wondered like which of my cars were the fastest. I sort of vaguely remembered like which ones were, but I was wondering if anybody had kind of taken this to the next level, and sure enough, they went to 11.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you go to YouTube and you just type in Hot Wheels racing, you will be inundated by men. These are all
Yeah.
all middle-aged white men who don't have anything better to do with their lives besides racing thousands of Hot Wheels cars and then posting YouTube videos of them, which garner tens or hundreds of thousands of hits. I mean, it's insane. You have to see it to believe it. It is mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so these guys are monetizing it too, I'm convinced, because they've got ads on the side. They're getting paid for it. So, so anyway, I don't have such grand aspirations for us just yet. But, I thought, my God, if we're going to be talking about this book and if we record these conversations, and if people are willing to watch these middle-aged goons in their basements rolling Hot Wheels cars down yellow tracks, someone probably out there is going to want to watch us do this. So that's how the whole idea of creating a YouTube channel came about. So we're kind of pairing your idea of a sort of book club of two with the YouTube channel of 100,000. Putting these two together, and that's how this came about.
I have. You might want to also mention that I've had, this blog as a potential blog.
Right.
Conversation,
which we're linking to. You'd mentioned this a while ago.
Yeah. So we have this. I have this website or this blog site called the Cult of Conversation that I've wanted to start for a long time, and maybe this will be the impetus for us to kind of start putting that together too, or at least.
I did link the station to your blog. I was able to locate it.
Oh, you were?
Okay. Yes, your blog is totally empty. There's absolutely nothing there right now.
Right. Sure.
So it's on you to get something in there.
Okay. Yeah.
But so the idea initially was simply that we would, starting off with Steven Pinker's book, we would read a chapter, and basically every 2 weeks. What's that?
Yeah, talk it out.
Yeah. Just basically, every 2 weeks we would put away a chapter and then meet up for an extended conversation, however long it goes on, and occasionally riff because we want to riff. Go down some alleyway that's owned by Pinker.
I think what we'll do is just people can anticipate that we will talk about the book, but it'll be mostly book when we do books, but it'll be partially us. And I think what did we suggest? We also may want to have some videos where we're not doing a book, where we just have a topic that we want to talk through, like we talked about. Maybe something like determinism, or something that really got us into the weeds, materialism, determinism, some of these really interesting philosophical topics that you and I have worked through, that I found on YouTube discussions about those that I would listen to over and over just to learn about them. And so any kind of conversations on those topics might be valuable. And hopefully we can also have some people who might be willing to or interested in joining us. So one of the things I would love to have is people, turn the Cult of Conversation, the blog, for example, into a place in which we can publish other people's ideas who maybe they're theists, since that's an interesting topic for both you and I, is people who believe that a God exists. We'd love to hear their case, for example. And we're willing to publish different people's articles, vet them, and then have responses and write responses or talk through responses. And I'd love to do interviews on here. I have some people that might be worth talking to who are in the arena of theology, philosophy, or whatever.
Well, you've got family members, so
family, but
you're rich with content in that regard.
But I mean, my Mennonite heritage gives me access to certain people who I'm friends with who might be worth talking to at different universities. So maybe some of those people might want to participate, and we can duke it out with them.
Pretty much everyone I know is godless heretics.
Yeah,
So,
right. So no, most of the people I know are not. Most of them are. I'm the one godless heretic among them. So
now you're not like still in the closet about being an
no,
atheist.
no, I do. I
You kind
probably
of
would be cautious about this in my business life, right?
yeah. I was kind of wondering about that.
So I am nervous about what that can mean for me there. But yeah, so this is a bit of a risk for me. It's maybe,
If our popularity gets out of hand, you mean?
yeah, once we're famous.
Well, once they start showing up on my planet here,
Yeah.
and I know
Yeah.
I need to leave.
I am concerned about that to some degree, but I do keep my business life separate from this stuff from my clients. It's not a part of it, and so I would hope that they wouldn't, if they found out I was doing this, find that too threatening if I wasn't in agreement or alignment with them in certain arenas. Most of the time, the people who are theists and believe in God, or Christians, or what have you, if we really look at the things we believe, 90% of the same things we're in alignment with. It's just in these certain arenas where I can't go there with them.
Also, I mean, how many people really care about what the philosophical persuasion of their insurance salesman
Well, some
is?
do. I know in your
Really?
world, it's not familiar, but there are a lot of. I have relatives that would find that very difficult. I'd love to
Really?
have conversations with them, but they would swallow hard to. I mean, if you would ask them, what method would you like to see when people are picking your mutual funds or investing your money in investments, they wouldn't say, well, I hope they get together in the morning and they pray about it and then press a button, right? Like, I don't think that that's what they would say. However, when it comes to a feeling of trust, they want to endorse, I have some relatives that are pretty passionate about Trump and about our very traditional, almost in line, even though they're in Canada, with the extreme American right.
Right. Yeah.
And you can imagine, right, with their convictions, it's hard to swallow. And I get it. It's hard for me to see myself from their perspective, because I know what it feels like to be somewhat in line with their kind of thinking. So so for me, there are different risks here than there are for you, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's no risk in that regard.
Yeah. I have some very good friends who are in that religious arena, who know who I am and know how I think religiously, and would back me if push came to shove, who are really relevant in that community. And so I feel pretty confident that there's love out for me, enough love out there for me in my immediate community to surpass any issues that would come up. But it does, I'm not interested in slamming people who I love but disagree with, right? Like, I'm not interested in,
right. Yeah.
in that.
Yeah.
But I do think these ideas matter, and I think where we land on whether there's a God, whether there's this or that, how we land on morality, I do think these things matter, and I think they're worth talking about. And I wish I could have more of those conversations with people who I'm close to. But maybe this way, you and I can find people who want to talk about this and disagree with us and enjoy that.
Well, it'll be interesting if they start coming out of the woodworks.
Well, we can only cross our fingers or just continue to have fun doing this. So.
Yeah, I mean, my impetus, like I say, was not to garner a fan base or anything. I'm about as, I'm fairly fame-averse in that regard. I think it's not,
I'm just happy my daughters still love me, right?
There you go.
That's his first thing.
Regardless of the nonsense that you've been spouting lately.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I mean, so, my goal here simply is, we have enjoyed, I mean, we've known each other now for 22 years, which every time I think about that, I'm like, holy shit, where did the time go? That's just crazy.
Too much of it we haven't been able to share.
No, I know. I mean, most of it has been, I mean, you've visited us at our home in Charlestown on a couple occasions. And we came over to Vancouver. That was, what was it, 2016?
Yeah, that sounds right.
So we have not actually been in the same room in about 4 years, roughly.
No, that's right.
But over the past 22 years, I mean, we've only seen each other. I mean, you can probably count the number of times on your two hands.
Yeah.
You know, but we've kept in touch with, you know, basically phone calls and emails, and now this technology.
What do you want to do from here? Do you want to shut down the formal part of the conversation?
Yeah. So I think so. I think we've kind of done what we needed to do right now. We don't want to start boring the people already.
Yeah. Well, I think we may have way surpassed boredom.
Yeah. They may.
Why don't we just say, listen, if there are people out there who are interested in following along in this book study, we're starting with Steven Pinker's Enlightenment now. We'll be doing what are we going to do this every couple of weeks?
Well, so okay, I think that we had previously agreed that next weekend, that is 1 week from today or a week from yesterday, we would do our first chapter, and then from there on out, it will be every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So anybody who does see this video, that's the basic program. And today, what is the date?
Participate for sure.
Yeah. So today is the Today is the 27th of September. So the first weekend in October, we should be landing with our first chapter.
If you are interested, you know, I hope you'll reach out to us and participate both in the conversation and if you have something you want to say about it that you want to bring to the front, or critique or challenge or question that we've said, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for people who will want to participate with us and get involved in conversations.
Yeah, and we'll have to figure out what happens when we have thousands of emails.
Yeah.
I don't have the time to read all that.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. I don't think
all right, so I'm going to go ahead and just put a pause on the recording here. Anyway, to all our future fans, goodbye for now.
Yeah.
Okay.